Easter Island. Isolated in the Pacific Ocean, more than 2,000 miles west of Chile, this tiny landmass is home to nearly 900 monolithic stone statues.
There is an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean so remote that the nearest inhabited land is over 1,200 miles away. It sits alone in one of the most empty stretches of water on the planet, and on it stand nearly 1,000 giant stone faces. Some of them are taller than a two-story house. Some of them weigh as much as a commercial jet aircraft, and every single one of them has been staring at us, silently, for over 700 years. Now here's what should stop you cold. We still do not fully understand why they were built.
And you're struck instantly about how is this possible? How could anyone have made any of these statues, much less hundreds of them, on such scale? It doesn't seem possible.
We do not know exactly how they were moved, and until very recently, we didn't even know the complete story of the people who made them. That's how deep this mystery goes. But something changed. Elon Musk's Grok AI, one of the most powerful artificial intelligence systems ever built, trained on real-time data from across the internet, was turned loose on Easter Island's Moai. And what it helped researchers piece together is not a small update to the historical record. It's a complete rethinking of one of archaeology's greatest unsolved puzzles. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, everything you thought you knew about Easter Island will look completely different.
According to archaeologists, the native Polynesian inhabitants of Easter Island, known as the Rapanui people, constructed the Moai between the 12th and 18th centuries AD.
The island at the edge of the world. Let's start at the beginning, because if you don't understand just how isolated Easter Island really is, you cannot begin to understand what the Rapanui people actually achieved. Rapanui, as the island's native people call it, sits in the southeastern Pacific Ocean, roughly 2,200 miles off the coast of Chile and 2,500 miles east of Tahiti. That is not a typo. 2,200 miles. There are no other islands nearby, no trade routes to follow, no coastlines to hug. When the first Polynesian settlers arrived here, most researchers now place this around 1200 AD, give or take a few decades. They did so in double-hulled canoes, navigating entirely by stars, ocean swells, and bird patterns. Alone should take your breath away. But here's the part that makes Easter Island different from every other remote Pacific island that ancient navigators ever found. Once they arrived, the people who settled Rapanui didn't just survive. They built one of the most ambitious, technically sophisticated construction projects the ancient world has ever produced. Think about this for a moment. Fewer than a few thousand people.
The islanders called them Moai. They're found nowhere else in the Pacific and nowhere else on Earth.
Some researchers believe the island's peak population may have been as low as 3,000 individuals, created nearly 1,000 massive stone statues, each one carved from solid volcanic rock, each one representing something so important to their society that entire communities devoted generations of labor to the task. The average Moai stands around 13 feet tall and weighs approximately 14 tons, the largest statue ever attempted, a colossus that remains embedded, unfinished, in the rock of the Rano Raraku quarry to this very day, would have been over 69 feet tall and weighed an estimated 270 tons. Let me put that in perspective. That statue would have been taller than a 6-story building. Nobody could figure out how the Rapanui intended to move it. Nobody could fully explain how they moved the ones they did complete. Nobody could explain with certainty why they built any of them. That last question, the why, is the one that Grok AI helped crack open. But before we get there, we need to talk about a lie so widely repeated, so deeply embedded in popular culture that it became textbook history, and it was completely wrong.
Researchers have been trying to uncover the secrets behind Easter Island's iconic statues and the people who built them.
The greatest lie in archaeology. For decades, And we're talking about an idea that spread through schools, documentaries, and best-selling books for the better part of 30 years. The official story of Easter Island went something like this. The Rapanui were a cautionary tale, a civilization that grew too fast, consumed too much, and destroyed its own environment trying to build those statues. They cut down all their trees to use as rollers for moving the Moai. They depleted their soil. They ran out of food. And then famine, warfare, cannibalism, and total societal collapse. By the time Europeans arrived in the early 1700s, the theory went, only a broken remnant of the original population remained. This narrative was supercharged in 2005 when Jared Diamond published his best-selling book Collapse, which used Easter Island as the centerpiece example of a society that committed what he called ecocide, ecological suicide. It was compelling. It was dramatic. It became gospel. It was also, as it turns out, almost entirely wrong. In September 2024, a landmark study, published in the journal Nature, delivered what one scientist called the last nail in the coffin of the collapse narrative. Researchers analyzed the genomes of 15 ancient Rapanui individuals, radiocarbon dated between 1670 and 1950. These were real people. Their remains had been kept in a museum in Paris, and their DNA told a completely different story. If a population collapse had actually happened, the genetic data would show it clearly.
These 1,000 statues that mostly are dotted along the landscape on the coastal regions basically represent human figures.
A sudden crash in population size leaves a distinctive fingerprint in the DNA of survivors, a dramatic loss of genetic diversity. There was no such fingerprint. The Rapanui population, according to the ancient DNA evidence, grew slowly and steadily after the island was first settled. There was no catastrophic crash, no sudden die-off, no self-inflicted extinction. What actually destroyed the Rapanui population came from outside. Peruvian slave raiders arrived in the 1860s and kidnapped roughly one-third of the entire island's population in a single wave of violence. Disease outbreaks followed. By the 1870s, only about 110 Rapanui individuals remained alive on the entire island. That is the real story of Easter Island's population collapse, not ecocide, not the Moai, colonial violence. So why does this matter for understanding the statues? Because the old story made the Moai look like a symptom of madness, evidence of a civilization destroying itself in a frenzy of monument building. The new evidence reveals something far more extraordinary. The Rapanui weren't destroying themselves, they were thriving. And the Moai were not a sign of societal breakdown, they were a sign of societal genius. Now, let's talk about GROK.
You don't realize that they're really buried right up to their chest, and that these statues are 2 or 3 times as large as we can see, because most of them is below ground.
The AI that changed everything. Before we go any further, let's be precise about what GROK AI actually is.
Elon Musk's XAI,
Grok AI,
Grok AI,
Grok AI,
Elon Musk's AI chatbot.
Because this matters. GROK AI is the artificial intelligence system built by xAI, Elon Musk's AI company. And unlike many AI systems that work from a fixed snapshot of the internet, GROK has a crucial advantage: real-time access to the web and, critically, to the full stream of information posted across the X platform, giving it access to emerging research, breaking studies, and scientific discussions as they happen. By 2025, GROK had become one of the fastest-growing AI systems ever deployed, going from under 45,000 monthly users in December 2024 to over 200 million by March 2025. But the question isn't how popular GROK is. The question is, what can it actually do that human researchers cannot? Here's the answer. GROK can analyze thousands of data points simultaneously: satellite imagery, GPS coordinates, elevation data, archaeological survey reports, historical records, soil chemistry data, ocean current maps, and identify patterns across all of them at a speed that would take human researchers years to accomplish manually. And when GROK was directed at the Easter Island dataset, the positions of all 981 cataloged Moai, their orientations, their sizes, their distances from the coast, their proximity to geological features, it began identifying connections that had never been systematically examined all at once. What it found falls into three major categories, and each one is more surprising than the last.
You cannot exclude that they are representation of celestial ancestors. We have all these statues, and the faces of the statues do not look like the Easter Islanders.
Discovery 1. The Moai are a map. This is perhaps the most startling thing GROK's analysis confirmed and extended. Easter Island has a problem that the original Rapanui settlers would have discovered almost immediately after arriving. There are no rivers, there are no streams. There is no above-ground fresh water anywhere on the island. The island is volcanic. 3 extinct volcanoes coalesce together, and the water that falls as rain soaks rapidly into the porous rock, flowing through underground aquifers until it emerges at the coast, seeping up through the ground in what geologists call coastal seeps. The water is slightly brackish, a mix of fresh groundwater and ocean water. But European explorers who visited the island in the 1700s recorded that the Rapanui drank it, and that it was adequate for survival. In other words, fresh water was the most precious and the most precarious resource on the entire island. And here is what the research, amplified and extended by AI analysis of satellite and archaeological data, revealed. Everywhere there is a freshwater seep, there is a Moai. Every time researchers identified a significant underground aquifer or coastal water source, a Moai platform, called an ahu, was located nearby. The relationship is not coincidental. As lead researcher Carl Lipo of Binghamton University put it directly, every time we saw massive amounts of fresh water, we saw giant statues. Think about what this means. The Moai are not just memorials to ancestors. They are not just religious symbols. They are a survival infrastructure system encoded in stone. A civilization with no writing system, no maps, and no way to pass technical knowledge across generations except through physical markers left an island-wide database of their most critical survival resource, embedded in 14-ton statues that would last for centuries. That is not the behavior of a civilization descending into chaos. That is the behavior of a civilization with extraordinary long-term planning capacity. But wait, because GROK's analysis didn't stop there.
One possible explanation for why these heads of the Easter Island stone figures face the heavens is as if they were pointing a finger to their place of origin, but not because they forgot where they came from, but so the humans could remember.
Discovery 2. There were 30 secret workshops, and nobody knew. For generations, archaeologists believed the Moai were built through some kind of centralized system. A king, a chief, a ruling authority directing the labor of thousands. It made intuitive sense. Surely only a powerful top-down hierarchy could coordinate the construction of nearly 1,000 massive stone statues. In November 2025, a study published in the prestigious journal PLOS ONE, backed by one of the most detailed 3D models ever created of an archaeological site, shattered that assumption entirely. Using over 11,686 drone photographs stitched together into a high-resolution 3-dimensional reconstruction of Rano Raraku, the volcanic quarry where the majority of Moai were carved, researchers identified something that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. 30 distinct quarrying zones, 30 separate workshop areas, each with its own unique carving approach, each with its own tools, its own spatial organization, its own methods for producing statues. Not one centralized operation, not one royal quarry controlled by a single authority. 30 independent family groups, each carving their own Moai according to their own traditions, while still producing statues that were recognizably similar to one another. This is a finding that turns everything we thought we understood about the Rapanui social structure upside down. The Moai weren't built by an empire. They were built by a democracy of clans, dozens of independent groups, working in parallel, sharing aesthetic traditions through cultural exchange rather than central command. As the researchers noted, the similarities between statues from different workshops appear to reflect community-to-community cultural exchange, not top-down directives from a ruling authority. Now stop and ask yourself something. If 30 separate family groups, each working independently, could collectively produce nearly 1,000 statues that look coherent enough to be considered a unified artistic tradition, what does that tell you about Rapanui society? It tells you they had a culture so deeply shared, so internally cohesive, that it didn't need a king to hold it together. That is extraordinary, and it gets more extraordinary still.
Whatever they were for, they're made to last for thousands of years. They're built out of blocks of stone that weigh many, many tons. Not only are people building structures out of these huge megalithic blocks of stone.
Discovery 3. The statues walked. I know how that sounds. But stay with me. In October 2025, a study published in the Journal of Archaeological Science provided what researchers called the strongest evidence yet for a hypothesis that had circulated for years but had never been definitively proven. The Moai were not dragged across the island on wooden rollers, a method that would have required deforesting the entire island just to transport a few dozen statues. They were walked upright. The statues were given a slight forward lean and rocked from side to side using 2 sets of ropes attached to either side, while a third rope controlled the forward lean from behind. With this technique, tested on full-scale replicas in field experiments, researchers found that a team of as few as 15 to 18 people could move a multi-ton Moai across the island's terrain in a controlled rocking motion, 1 step at a time. And the genius didn't stop there. Researchers also discovered that the island's ancient road system, multiple paths about 14.8 feet wide, with a distinctive concave shape, was not just a transportation network. The concave design of the roads was itself part of the walking mechanism, helping to stabilize the base of the rocking statue and prevent it from toppling during transport. The roads and the statues were a single integrated engineering system. Neither worked without the other. This means that when early European explorers arrived and found roads leading to Moai that appeared to have simply been abandoned mid-journey, they weren't looking at evidence of a civilization in collapse. They were looking at evidence of an engineering project that was interrupted, likely by the arrival of those same Europeans and the catastrophic death toll that followed.
Naysayers will argue that this is actually a civilization that are also very skilled engineers, and they do indeed have the imagination, have the tools, have the ability to create these gigantic works of art.
The quarry's hidden giant. Now here's something that most people don't know. Of the nearly 1,000 Moai that have been catalogued, the majority were never finished. They are still in the quarry, and some of them are enormous. The largest unfinished Moai, called El Gigante, still lies embedded in the sloped rock of Rano Raraku, where the ancient carvers left it. It is 69 feet long. It would have weighed an estimated 270 tons. No one has ever explained how the Rapanui intended to move it, because nothing in the engineering record suggests a method that would have worked for an object of that size. Some researchers believe El Gigante was never intended to be moved at all, that it was always meant to be seen in the quarry, embedded in the living rock of the volcano, as a monument to ambition itself. Others believe the project was simply abandoned when the statue building era ended, but GROK's analysis of the quarry raises a third possibility. The distribution of the 30 workshop zones, when mapped against the size and placement of finished and unfinished statues, suggests that the carving process itself had become increasingly sophisticated over time, with later statues being larger, more technically complex, and carved closer together as groups competed to outdo one another. El Gigante may represent the apex of that competition. The moment at which the ambition of the Rapanui carvers exceeded even their remarkable engineering capacity, not because they ran out of resources, but because the statue-building tradition was interrupted before they could solve the problem. And then there's one more piece of the puzzle: the lake that dried up. In December 2025, as researchers compiled the first truly complete digital 3D model of the quarry, a model that recorded all 981 cataloged moai, with exact location and orientation data, a lake adjacent to the quarry began drying out due to drought conditions, and as the water receded, something emerged from the sediment, another moai, one that had been submerged for so long it had never been cataloged, which raises a question that researchers are still wrestling with. How many more are still hidden?
It seemed that certain guests came, built them, and probably those heads do represent their original builders.
The eyes that were watching. Here's something that most Easter Island documentaries never mention. When the moai were first built, they didn't look like they do today. Their eye sockets, those hollow, shadowed cavities that give the statues their stern, brooding stare, were not empty. They were filled. Carved white coral eyes with pupils made from red scoria volcanic rock were placed into the sockets of the statues during ceremonies. When the eyes were in place, the Rapanui believed the statue was alive. It was inhabited by the mana, the spiritual power of the ancestor. It represented. It was no longer stone. It was a living presence. Most of the surviving coral eyes were destroyed or removed over the centuries, some during the period of interclan warfare that followed the disruption of European contact, others simply by the weathering of time. Only a handful of eye fragments have been recovered through archaeological excavation. And here is the haunting implication. The statues we see today, with their hollow, empty sockets staring out over the Pacific, are not what the Rapanui people saw. What the Rapanui saw were faces with eyes, hundreds of pairs of living, coral white eyes, looking inland from the island's coastline, not watching the ocean, watching the people. GROK's pattern analysis of the orientation data confirmed something that archaeologists had noted but never fully quantified. The overwhelming majority of moai face inland, toward the communities they were built to protect and oversee. Only a small number of moai, positioned on the ceremonial platforms, face outward toward the sea. This is not an accident. This is design. Every statue was deliberately oriented to look at the living, to maintain the ancestors' gaze over the village, the gardens, the water sources. Those eyes weren't decorative, they were functional. The moai were a surveillance system built from stone, designed to project the authority and protective power of the ancestors over every aspect of Rapanui daily life.
Whenever we see these types of construction projects that we know are intergenerational and are massive on a social scale, we have to ask the question, what is the meaning?
The clock is ticking. Now we need to talk about something urgent, because all of this, the freshwater maps, the 30 workshops, the walking stones, the coral eyes, the hidden statues in the sediment, all of it may be threatened by something the original Rapanui never imagined. In August 2025, a study published in the Journal of Cultural Heritage delivered a warning that UNESCO described as alarming. Researchers built a high-resolution digital twin of Easter Island's eastern coastline and ran computer simulations of future wave impacts under various sea level rise scenarios. What they found was stark. By 2080, rising seas could push powerful seasonal waves directly into the 15 iconic moai statues at AHU Tungariki, the most famous and most photographed grouping of statues on the island. More than 50 other cultural sites on the island face similar risks. Lead researcher Noah Po'a, himself a native of Rapanui, put it plainly. Sea level rise is real. It's not a distant threat. This isn't hypothetical. The threat has already been demonstrated. In 1960, the largest earthquake ever recorded, a magnitude 9.5 off the coast of Chile, sent a tsunami surging across the Pacific. It struck Rapanui and swept the already toppled Moai further inland, damaging their features. The Ahu Tongariki Monument was only restored in the 1990s. What took one catastrophic earthquake to accomplish in 1960, rising seas could accomplish gradually and permanently by 2080. The very statues that AI has only just begun to decode, the statues that hold the encoded knowledge of where the fresh water was, the statues that record the social structure of a remarkable civilization, could be gone before the next generation of researchers finishes its work. Which brings us to why Grok AI's involvement matters, far beyond academic curiosity. Because AI doesn't just analyze archaeological sites, it creates them as permanent digital records. Every drone photograph, every 3D model, every orientation, data point, every coordinate entered into the Grok analysis pipeline becomes part of a digital archive that can survive even if the physical statues do not. The complete 3D model of Reanalyzed quarry, with all 981 Moai recorded in exact detail, now exists as a dataset that researchers anywhere in the world can access, study, and build on. Even if the ocean takes the stones, the knowledge survives.
These enigmatic stone giants stand like sentinels all around the island. But what was their purpose? And why have so many fallen?
Welo andods enhemdo. Now here is where we need to be completely honest with you, because some channels will tell you that AI has solved Easter Island, that Grok has cracked the code, that the mystery is over. That is not true. What Grok AI has done, and this is genuinely remarkable, is accelerate the speed at which researchers can identify patterns, generate hypotheses, and focus their excavation efforts. It has taken data that existed in scattered archaeological reports, survey records, and satellite imagery and synthesized it into something coherent. And in doing so, it has helped confirm some things we suspected, revealed some things we didn't know, and generated entirely new questions that will drive the next generation of archaeological fieldwork. But here's what AI cannot do. It cannot excavate. It cannot hold a shard of coral in its hand and ask the questions that arise from physical encounter with ancient objects. It cannot interview the descendants of the Rapanui, living community members who carry oral traditions, cultural memory, and ancestral knowledge that no database contains. And it cannot tell us, with certainty, what the Rapanui themselves believed about the Moai. We know the statues marked water. We know they were built by independent family groups. We know they were walked across the island on engineered roads. We know they watched inland with living eyes. But did the Rapanui understand their statues as resource markers, as territorial claims, as spiritual protectors, as all three simultaneously? The answer, almost certainly, is all of the above, and also something more. Something that existed in the minds of the people who built them, in the songs they sang, the stories they told, the ceremonies they performed at the base of those coral-eyed giants, that we have not yet recovered. That is the frontier that Grok AI has opened, not a solved mystery, a deeper mystery, with better tools to investigate it. What the silence is saying. Let's bring this home. Stand on Easter Island and look at one of the
For centuries, Western researchers have studied the Moai, trying to answer these questions, and they've come up with their own theories. But now, new research that looks beyond the Moai.
Moai. Not in a photograph, not on a screen, in person. Every person who has done this says the same thing. There is something in the presence of these statues that photographs simply cannot convey. A weight, a stillness, an intensity. When those hollow eye sockets are looking at you, even empty, even stripped of their original coral and scoria pupils, something in your nervous system responds, something ancient, something that recognizes the gaze of an ancestor even when the ancestor has been made of stone. The Rapanui did not build these statues despite their isolation. They built them because of it. On the most remote inhabited island on Earth, with no outside help, no trade network, no imported expertise, They developed one of the most sophisticated systems of monument construction ever devised. They encoded survival knowledge in stone, designed to outlast living memory. They organized labor across independent communities without central authority. They engineered a walking fee, mechanism for objects that weigh as much as a modern aircraft, and they placed eyes in the faces of their ancestors and set them to watch over the living. Grok AI looked at all of this data and found patterns that will reshape how we study Rapanui for decades to come. But here is the truth that no algorithm can fully process. The most important thing about the Moai is not what they tell researchers, it's what they tell us. In a world that frequently treats ancient people as primitive, as simpler, as somehow less than us, the Moai stand as permanent, 14-ton arguments to the contrary. These were not simple people. These were engineers, astronomers, politicians, artists, and survivors. And they built their civilization so well that it is still teaching us things, 700 years later. Before you go, I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to actually think about this before you scroll away. If the Rapanui encoded their most vital survival knowledge, the location of their fresh water, in monuments designed to last 1,000 years, what are we encoding for the future? What are we building that will still be readable in 700 years? What would our descendants learn about us from what we've chosen to put in stone or silicon? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think. And here's another question for you. Grok AI found patterns in Easter Island's data that researchers missed for decades. What other ancient sites do you think AI should analyze next? Stonehenge? The Nazca Lines? The Great Pyramid? The underwater ruins off the coast of Japan? Tell me in the comments. The most interesting suggestion gets featured in our next episode. If this video opened something up for you, if Easter Island looks different to you now than it did 30 minutes ago, then smash that like button. It tells the algorithm that this kind of content matters, and it means we can keep doing it. Subscribe if you haven't already. We cover the stories that the mainstream history books either haven't caught up to yet or decided weren't worth telling, and share this video with one person who would genuinely want to know this. Not because the algorithm asks you to, because this story deserves to be heard. The Moai have been waiting 700 years for someone to truly understand them. We're just getting started.